It looks like it's time to plan to be without Dylan Edwards once again in Lawrence this Saturday.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We heard from Chris Klieman on Monday. We heard that there's probably not going to be a Dylan Edwards. We're going to get into that. We also had some other thoughts about what came from the bye week as they get ready for the Sunflower Showdown in Lawrence, a couple players' remarks, and then, of course, we're going to end this episode today with what we saw on Tuesday afternoon with the women's basketball team beginning Big 12 Media Days in Kansas City. Hit that subscribe button, keeping Locked On Kansas State always here on YouTube or wherever you listen to audio. Check it out, do that thing you need to do, and keep growing this, bringing you Wildcat coverage like no one else, your team every day. Let's get into it. Chris Klieman talked about the team, talked about the bye week on Monday's presser, and there was a lot of things that, well, I guess my immediate thing was, of course, Dylan Edwards. He hasn't practiced. Chris Klieman made it clear that if he plays, it's a bonus. Doesn't sound like he's too optimistic about Dylan Edwards playing this week in Lawrence. If he plays, it's a bonus. So where does that lead this offense? Where does it leave it heading into Lawrence for the Sunflower Showdown? Trying to keep the streak alive, currently at 16, going for 17, but most importantly, trying to avoid that dreadful third loss inside the Big 12 Conference, which, of course, would end your season hopes whatsoever, the ones that are just barely still there, with your chances to get to Arlington. If you look at some of the games last week, you know, there was a couple games that kind of fell in your direction. We talked about it on the show, how we needed a couple of those big-time games to win. I think you got about 80% of them in your favor. So it worked out. It was a good bye week overall, productive bye week for Kansas State. Now, was it productive from Chris Klieman and the roster? Well, that's what we got to try and decipher on this one. Klieman he confirmed, that Dylan Edwards did not practice last week at all during the bye week and, quote, probably won't play unless something changes midweek. So let's just not count on it. It's probably not going to happen. Edward needs live practice reps. He doesn't need just mental ones getting ready for a game in Kansas. We saw it when he's 100%. When he plays against Rutgers, he's spot on. When he played against UCF, he was amazing. Every other time where he wasn't 100%, it was a game plan blooper. It was just an absolute bust from Matt Wells. So I would rather go on this entire week, assuming that he is just not going to be there, bring in that TCU game plan where Joe Jackson led the charge, because I think he did a great job. And maybe it's time to maybe start thinking differently about Dylan Edwards the rest of the season. And I know that might be a tough pill to swallow, but hang with me for just a minute. I think you need to expect more from Joe Jackson. Absolutely. I think Devon Rice will start making more of an impact as well, especially if they know they've had a week and a half, almost it will be 2 weeks once game time hits, of preparing without Dylan Edwards. And really, you can add an extra week on top of that because they prepped TCU without Dylan Edwards. I think Avery Johnson and even maybe Blake Barnett will come in and take more design carries as well, and you need that. There was a game, Kansas and Cincinnati, so far this season. I think that's the one you really have to pay attention to. If you're going to go back and watch any past games or any past highlights of the Jayhawks, prepare yourself for this game against Kansas State, the Sunflower Showdown. I think you watched that one. It was an absolute track meet between Cincinnati and KU, and I think that's exactly what could happen in this one between the Wildcats and the Flightless Birds. Look for heavier resilience and reliance from the offensive line, and that's something they have to step up on. I mentioned when we were heading into the bye week after the win against TCU, that was my biggest concern for the offense. It wasn't the fact of who knows what's going to happen to Dylan Edwards. I think Joe Jackson stepped up perfectly. I think for the offensive side, I wanted the offensive line to be more prepared to play bully ball. And they have to do that right away in Lawrence on Saturday. And that means they have to be productive with getting the run blocking going right away. If you look at PFF data scores, I know that's been like a hot topic over the last couple of weeks where people either they agree or disagree with PFF. If you, whatever side you want to be on, that's fine. However, if you look at those advanced data stats, Kansas State has done really well on the offensive line standpoint from pass blocking. Almost every game, they're almost phenomenal. Like the word phenomenal is probably the right word to put in a category for the offensive line when it comes to pass blocking. But on the run blocking side, it is below average and at sometimes abysmal. So there's that huge big gap between the pass blocking and the run blocking from Kansas State. Now, it has improved, and it has improved with and without Dylan Edwards. That's a good thing to keep in mind right now because we probably aren't going to have Dylan Edwards in the backfield this Saturday, and especially improved to a more median type of performance. It was an average performance instead of a below average performance from the offensive line in the run blocking department this past week, the win against TCU. The bye week was used for what Chris Klieman called as, quote, developmental reps, and especially from scout team players and long-term depth. Klieman credited that approach for recent consistency in production and run blocking, if you will. But I think we're getting to that point to where, you know, we already are dealing with the roster size being one thing heading into the season, but you're getting into the meat and potatoes of the year. You're already dealing with injuries. More are bound to happen. You got to make sure everybody's ready if you're going to make this late season run, something that is absolutely still on the table for Kansas State. The run game strategy is going to be absolutely interesting for Kansas State on Saturday. KU's run defense has been gashed this season. I think there's been multiple opponents that have piled up 400 plus yards on the ground. That's happened quite a couple times for KU. Even without Edwards, I expect Kansas State to be very heavy and test that run game early with tempo and power looks for Kansas State. The key question here is, though, can the offense have a balanced approach against Kansas, a team that started off red hot this season, in my opinion? They've kind of regressed back to the mean. You can maybe call it the opposite reaction in the good way for Kansas State. Started off slow and find themselves back at the mean. Can you find that offensive balance and make it sustainable without that home run threat of Edwards? It worked last week against TCU. Can it happen once again off a bye week? Something that, although it worked so far this season, hasn't always been the best with Chris Klieman at the helm, coming in and winning a football game after the bye. And can they do it 2 games in a row, winning in TCU, dealing with adjustments, and then winning against Kansas for the 17th straight time? Can they still create chunk plays through the scheme rather than just speed? Because you are taking away a ton of speed when you're shifting to most of your carries going from Dylan Edwards to Joe Jackson. There's no doubt about that. It worked last week against TCU. Keep that in mind. But there's no doubt about that speed is going away. The Dylan Edwards question is probably going to dominate the headlines this entire week. That's just how it goes when a star player is out. It's continued to be like that for multiple weeks now. But the deeper storyline itself, I think it's about belief. I really do. This team's identity has shifted over the last 3 weeks, which brings us to the rivalry itself. Let's talk about that next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, let's be honest, most of us can't even name all the financial accounts that we have, let alone what they're worth between 401ks, savings, and investments. It's easy to lose track. And that's why we are leaving money on the table. It absolutely could do that if we are not prepared. So that's why I personally started using Monarch. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. It's helped me organize my accounts, track my spending, and get a better handle on my investments without having to touch a single spreadsheet. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's right. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. This episode of Locked On Kansas State is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and with that $5, you get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Just pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It's like it's watching football, even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. I know I always enjoy it, and I always choose FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Well, the streak is on the line. There is no doubt about that. 16 wins for Kansas State. Since 2008, they have won every single one of these ones, and 17 is on the line. It'll be in Lawrence. It might be the toughest way to go. This is the most dangerous Kansas team that Chris Klieman has ever faced. And if K-State slips, the entire tone of the season absolutely changes. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. When you look at the record that you are currently at, when you look at the type of season you have already had, you've already lost to one rival at the beginning of the season. If you lose to two, and it also is the last dagger in the season to get you completely out of contention for a Big 12 championship, something that is very close to already being out of reach, you definitely have a different tone, and this season changes completely the rest of the way. And I think that's exactly what is on the mind of Chris Klieman and the rest of the players at Kansas State. The mentality from Chris Klieman, from what I gathered, he was downplaying the streak talk. That's one thing that definitely was happening. He said the streak's going to have nothing to do with Saturday. Who can block, who can tackle, who can make plays is where it's going to be. Look, that's great coach speak and all, but you can't tell me that the players of Kansas State are not thinking about keeping that streak alive. They 100% are. And you can't go on the flip side, and you can't tell me that those Kansas Jayhawk fans, those Kansas Jayhawk players are only thinking about breaking that streak. They're trying to make it serious. They're trying to take it personal. They're trying to have everything they possibly can, chip on their shoulder type of mentality, whether it's about the tortillas and the pocket knives from a couple weeks ago, any kind of billboard material that they're going to have, Kansas is going to use it. So you can't tell me. And although that might sound like the best thing, like maybe one player will hear that and say, yeah, coach is right. We can't just think about the streak. We got to be mentality about it. And I understand why a coach would say that in an opening press conference for the week. But this streak absolutely has everything to do with everything on Saturday. Let's not get that twisted. There's no doubt about that. The emphasis, though, from Chris Klieman on execution over emotion, he said you can throw out everything when both teams have bye weeks. And that is something to keep in mind, right? Both of them are coming on off a bye here. You did have the deal, the fiasco with Kansas and Texas Tech just a few weeks ago, making the tortilla and pocket knife jokes are one thing. But I do think them being on a bye, and we mentioned this on Monday's episode with a crossover with myself and Derek Johnson, where we thought that the bye would probably kind of dim that out. And I'm sure it is. And there's a lot of other things to be emotional and to worry about when you are playing this game, the Sunflower Showdown. Again, a game that Kansas is trying to beat over Kansas State. Des Purnell spoke about not overdoing the rivalry, the emotion, while reminding newcomers what it means. I think Desmond Purnell needs to have a huge game, something he did in TCU. He needs to continue that momentum. We need to have, all the Kansas kids that are playing for Kansas State need to find a way to carry that pride message into the locker room about the team that owns the state. And so far over the last 16 seasons, that has been the Wildcats. I think that, again, this is going to be a very tough game. Kansas State can't keep squeaking by. They've done that over the last couple seasons. And the way this season has started and the way that this records have ended up right now, you're putting yourself in a bad situation to have, if you want to consider it in the eyes of football, a little brother finish you for the year. You absolutely could have that happen. The momentum right now, before this game starts, there's no doubt about it. It has nothing to do with the win against TCU or the loss against Texas Tech for Kansas 2 weeks ago. The momentum heading into this game, before the final whistle blows, is in favor of Kansas. The money that has been put into that organization, into that program over the last few months, the building and the improvements at their new stadium I put in quotation marks, is basically saying, hey, Kansas State, we're coming after you in the state of Kansas and in national recruiting to take over as that top team in the state. Kansas State has the perfect opportunity to shut them up on Saturday and say money isn't going to change the fact that we've beat you then 17 times in college football, 17 in a row. But the momentum is absolutely in the Jayhawks' favor right now. I don't think I could be swayed otherwise, at least at this moment. Go back to Dylan Edwards' conversation real quick. Could this possibly be, because remember, this is a Kansas player as well, Dylan Edwards. If he doesn't play, have we seen the last of him in a Kansas State uniform, at least taking a snap? I think it's possible. I think the injury doubts, the frustration that has happened so far this season, the redshirt considerations, although his agent did put a public statement out a few weeks ago. If Kansas State loses this football game, I think it's absolutely almost a guarantee that we don't see Dylan Edwards play again for Kansas State. The debate around Avery needing to take hits, I think that's something we need to discuss as well. He did a good job running the football a lot more over the last couple of weeks. One thing that does come into mind is that there was a certain play where he slid before the first down marker, and then, of course, he had to wind up using a different play to get the first down. It's almost like he took it personal. I'm just happy that he's running the football. Whether he's taking hits or not, I think as a quarterback, you have to be worried about not taking all those hits, 100%. But I also do think you have to be aggressive at some points. I think there's a healthy balance that needs to happen there. I don't want to say Avery Johnson isn't taking enough hits, because I think you could make that kind of narrative. You could have that debate. And I would agree with you. I'd lean towards it a little bit. But overall, I'm just happy he's running the football. And if the fact that he's running the football and still becoming a dynamic dual threat quarterback, something that the defense has to actually pay attention to, if him trying to avoid hits is what keeps Chris Klieman and Matt Wells from continuing to call his number to allow him to do that, then I'm okay with it. But if there is an aggressive play and it comes down and it's a 4th and 3 and you have to take a big hit to get that first down, well, then Avery, you got to put your head down, buddy. Like, that's got to happen. 100%. You can't stop a drive in order to not take a hit. Like, that is something that will have to happen. His leadership will dictate that tone. And I think his quarterback toughness would ripple through the entire roster. I think it would do a whole bunch of things. We talked about energy after the first bye week, heading in UCF. Energy was huge. How will energy be in Lawrence after the second bye week? I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think there's a lot of things to be emotional about. But if Avery Johnson ran something up the middle, and even if he took a big hit and then jumped right back up, could you imagine what the sidelines would do? I'm just saying. I'm just saying out loud. If Kansas State controls the line of scrimmage, they win the football game. If they stop Jalen Daniels and slow him down and have a whole bunch of pressure on him, something that Texas Tech ultimately did, I don't think they can do it as good as Texas Tech did, but I think they can win the football game. But if Jalen Daniels plays clean and dictates the tempo, Kansas State's in trouble. So I think if Kansas State wins this one, I think they can win this one 100%. It might, if they do, I think it buries Kansas emotionally for quite some time. And all the momentum that we discussed about heading into this game, with all the money they put into the program, with all the additions they've added to the stadium, with the fact that they're going to be playing in Lawrence for the first time since those additions have been made, the fact that you're going to hopefully have Lincoln Cure score a touchdown, right? Let's not forget about that. Lincoln Cure towards Kansas State over Oregon, over KU. If they can find a way to do that, I think it changes so much. But if the Jayhawks win, it resets this rivalry entirely. There's a lot riding on this game in Lawrence this week. But football isn't the only story in Manhattan this week. Jeff Nitty's women's basketball squad just went national again because it's basketball season once more, and Big 12 Media Days are now underway. Let's talk about that, what the women's basketball team had to say in Kansas City. We'll discuss that next right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, college football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's nothing like it, but let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, and prices jumping at checkout, that's just no bueno. That's where GameTime comes in. It's the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you paid. I just pulled up GameTime, and in a couple of taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games as low as, get this, $25 So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download GameTime today. Big 12 Media Days are underway in Kansas City, and the women's basketball team was up first on Tuesday. Overall, we saw Jeff Mittie and 3 of Kansas State's women basketball players taking the stage for the Wildcats. And ultimately, Jeff Mittie's message is what got me at Big 12 Media Days. Really, the overall takeaways that I took from it, we're not going to dig into it too deep because although Media Days are really cool, what's really more important is seeing their performance on the court, which we're going to get really soon. An exhibition coming up very soon for the women's. Of course, we'll have you covered here. I believe that one's on Monday, and we'll have you covered on Monday night with a reaction. But overall, I think Jeff Mittie's message was work ethic, chemistry, and fresh identity right from the bat. And that's kind of what I was looking for. I'm glad that a lot of those questions were answered, especially since I didn't get a chance to get to Kansas City this season. Kansas State was picked 7th in the Big 12 preseason poll, and you can take that as a disrespect, or you can just take that for what it is, even though you're coming off a 28-8 Sweet 16 season. But of course, there's huge roster turnover, replacing star veterans like Yoka Lee, Serena Sundell, 2 players that will have their numbers and names up in the rafters at some point. But the focus from Jeff Mittie was just trying to find the new work ethic, the new work culture, the new just buy-in from all these new players. And he said he was surprised by how little he had to, quote, teach the standard. They already had it, which I thought was awesome. Of course, Taryn Sides is going to be the de facto veteran, if you will, leading on lessons from last year's All-Americans. She's probably going to be one of your main scorers on this team, and she definitely is the returning player with the most production from last season. She was one of 3 players that represented Kansas State in this one. Izila Arenas, the daughter of Gilbert Arenas, NBA player that played for the Washington Wizards, among other teams, was also one of them. She's going to be wearing number 0, just like Agent Zero, her father in the NBA. And she's a transfer from Louisville at the size, defensive intensity, her leadership growth as well. Going to be really fun to watch her this season. And then 6'1" forward, Nashta Classens was the 3rd representative for Kansas State. And I think she's going to be really, really fun to watch this season. She's going to be wearing number 4, so big shoes to fill. But she's coming from the Belgian national team. She brings international IQ and maturity. So overall, I think watching the chemistry and the finding the new identity will be something to pay attention to right away. I think Jeff Mittie hit the nail right on the head. He wants answers early, and I think he's going to get them because they play a brutal slate early. UNC, Ole Miss, South Dakota State, Creighton, they play a lot of those games very early in the season in their non-conference schedule. And the goal for Mittie and his coaching staff is to simulate March pressure from day one. What that told me is that not only does he think this team is maybe needs some patience, but the fact that they're ready to simulate that pressure from the beginning tells me that he thinks this team can still make the tournament. Maybe it's not a Sweet 16 team, but when you're talking about still competing in the Big 12 and something that you were only projected to be 7th in the Big 12 preseason poll, getting back to the tournament this year, I think is a huge accomplishment. And especially if you can find yourself hosting something that you could not do last season. But either way, I think just getting there would be absolutely huge. Individually, we've worked incredibly hard. Now we have to learn each other better. That's something that we got from one of the team identity quotes. The chemistry piece is the next mountain, of course. And I think you're going to get that, and you're going to start to see it right off the bat from the exhibition game that we're going to get in just under a week's time. And then once the season starts on Monday, November 3rd, it's right around the corner, folks. I mean, we have basketball right around the corner. As soon as November hits, it is going to be here, and it's going to be exciting. The women's play on Monday the 3rd, the men's play on Tuesday the 4th, and then we are in full swing all the way, hopefully, into deep April, meaning that one or both of these teams make a deep run in the dance. Mittie says this group might have more young talent than any team he's ever coached, and that makes a lot of sense with the freshmen coming in, with, of course, the not a lot of veteran presence. It makes a lot of sense. That means that the ceiling is ultimately high. But that means the floor could be pretty low as well in your first season as well. A lot of chemistry, a lot of things to work on. Could it be a slow start, especially with that tough slate? Absolutely could be. But it also could be one that shocks the entire system and says, hey, you should have never doubted Kansas State, a team that made the Sweet 16 last season. The message is simple, though. The same standard, although there's different faces. Expect this team to be scrappy, because I think they will be with their young talent, with their energy, with their high level of performances. But I think it's going to be, I think they're going to be scrappy early, but I think they're going to be really dangerous by March. I think this team makes the tournament if I had to give you a prediction from today. So that's going to be it for this episode of Locked On Kansas State. From Dylan Edwards' uncertainty to Avery Johnson's leadership test, from the Sunflower Showdown coming on Saturday to a new era of Wildcat women's hoops. We got it all covered here at Locked On Kansas State. K-State's identity is shifting before your eyes, and we're going to have it all covered right here. Drop your takes below. Let me know in the comment description below. Question of the day is, how confident are you heading into Lawrence? Your rate scale out of 1 through 10, 10 being the utmost confidence that we are going to kick butt in Lawrence and move to 17 wins straight. If it's a 1, meaning you think that this is going to be the year the streak ends. And what's your early read on Jeff Mitty's new squad? I'd love to hear that as well. Thanks for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen of the day. Today, for your second listen, check out Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll has you covered with the most exciting conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championship to everything in between. Fighting for Dr. Pepper is only just one thing, so find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please like the video. Please subscribe. We'll see you back here next time, right here on Locked On Kansas State.